Hello, everybody. Terrence Lakeview here with another episode of the Intellectual Agrarian podcast, where we talk philosophy from the farm. When you look at an organic label, you may not know that someone had to visit the operation that made the product or raised that food. These humble people are the organic inspectors. Today, we'll be talking to Margaret Scoles, Executive Director of the International Organic Inspectors Association. She has been an organic inspector for over 30 years and has recently been awarded the 2018 Growing Organic Industry Award by the Organic Trade Association. With Margaret, we'll be discussing what brought her into the organic farming world, what an organic inspector does, what the International Organic Inspectors Association does, and so much more. So listen to this episode with Margaret Scoles. Margaret Scoles, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Before we begin, would you mind sharing a brief biographical sketch with the audience?
Sure. I live very close to where I grew up as a child. I haven't lived here my whole life, but I grew up on a cattle ranch with hay and grain, and as soon as possible, when I was 17, I left and went to, actually left in the middle of my senior year of high school to go to college at Montana State University, and couldn't wait to go south, and so I did that pretty quick. I finished 1 year of college at Bozeman, and then I went to Tucson, Arizona. We lived on ranches and farms in Arizona, and that's where my husband was from. So about 4 years later, I started back to college and got a degree in plant science from the University of Arizona. I worked my way through college for a barley breeding project, and my goal at that time was to be a plant breeder. That's how I thought we would feed the world and save the world, was through plant breeding, so that was my goal. But I was fortunate to work for the barley breeding project with a cytogeneticist. I was pretty well known, and he was very disappointed that when I graduated, I decided to come back to Montana. And my husband and I wanted my grandmother to be able to stay on her ranch. And so we came back and started ranching and started having kids. And for the next 5 years, I was pretty occupied with starting our family. And I've always been a gardener. So probably about 1988, I got a chance to become an organic inspector, and that's 30 years ago. So that turned out to be my life's work.
Congratulations on your 30th anniversary of inspections.
Thanks. Aren't too many of us still being able to say that, I have a feeling.
So what led to your interest in organics to begin with?
Well, I've always loved gardening, and my mother was a great gardener, and we had 5 kids, so we all had sort of different specialties. And she was happy I liked taking care of the garden, and I was happy I didn't have to stay in the house. So I was a gardener from early on, but we didn't call it organic back then, and sometimes chemicals were used in the garden. Not a whole lot. We used manure as fertilizer and very little pesticides, but sometimes I know my mom would get the shaker can of 7 or whatever. And when I was about 12, I had an aunt, Marla. We lived fairly close to her, and she had decided to become a gardener, and so she got Rodale magazines. So she got the Organic Gardening magazine, and she passed all of her magazines on to me, and then she encouraged me to exhibit things in the county fair. So I think I was exhibiting in the county fair with flowers and vegetables at about 12, and I just became completely engrossed in reading everything Rodale that I could, and she just passed everything on to me. So that's where I really got familiar with the term organic. I guess I could give Rodale credit for that.
To anyone listening, I have to say, if you ever have the opportunity to do something like that for a young niece, cousin, brother, whatever, take those opportunities, because you never know the effect it's going to have on the kid's life.
It's true. It's true. It was a profound impact, and I'm sure at the time she was just helping one more kid do something that they were interested in.
So what led to becoming an organic inspector? How did that come about?
Well, in 1987, I guess it would be, my youngest was 3. coming on 3, and we were pretty much starving. We'd gone to the back to the lander lifestyle, and my husband was working in town, driving a long ways to work in town. We had a little batch of cows. It was droughty and grasshoppery, and cow prices were terrible, and I thought, I've got to get a job. And so I worked for a year driving 36 miles, some of which was dirt road, some of which was gravel road, for $4 an hour, very impractical.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, gas was cheaper then, but it still was a bad deal. And we were at my parents' house, and my husband was reading an ag paper, and he said, "Hey, this sounds like you." And I said, "What?" And he said, "Here, look." And it said, "Wanted part-time organic farm inspector, must have own transportation." And at that time, there was no email, of course, and nobody had cell phones, and there wasn't even a phone number. So I literally applied by snail mail. I got my resume, and which didn't look too bad. I'd been selling vegetables at the farmer's market. I had grew up on the ranch and had a degree in agriculture, so it wasn't too hard to make myself look okay to be an organic inspector. So I sent my resume, I sent a letter expressing my interest, and I got a phone call, and the person said, "Can you come to Helena for a training?" Well, Helena's 400 miles from here, so that was a fair piece, even in Montana. And it was the first time we'd left both of our children for 2 nights, Grandma and Grandpa, and my husband Bob and I. So we've been together with it forever. My husband and I have been married for 44 years.
Congratulations.
Anyway, oh, thanks. And he drove me to, and he actually ended up driving me to quite a few inspections. I mean, not all of them, but sometimes we made a trip of it. And we went to Helena. Bob Quinn, who you might know, he's the person who made Kamut famous. He was had helped organize a certification chapter in Montana. It was the Organic Crop Improvement Association at that time, and they needed inspectors. So he was there, and he talked about the standards, because that was before a national organic program, and they were private standards. He talked about the standards, and he talked about inspecting, and there were, as I remember it, maybe 12 people. There were a bunch of us, mostly young, not all. And at the end, he said, "How many of you would like to do this?" And 8 of us put our hands in the air. And 4 of us ended up inspecting. I don't know what happened to the other 4, but I was one of the 4 that got to do 4 inspections. So exactly 30 years ago, I did 4 inspections. And I just totally fell in love with the work. I made all kinds of mistakes. I mean, my whole training consisted of half an hour or a half a day of kind of listening to what it was about, and there was no review. They just sent us the files and said, "Here, go do the inspection." I distinctly remember my first inspection because I had reviewed the file, and when I got there, it was sheep and cattle, and none of them were certifiable. So I felt kind of, it really taught me the importance of asking questions before you go to do the inspection. And the second mistake I made was I inspected an enormous operation and tried to do it in a half day. So I had 2 inspections in one day and 2 inspections in the next day. I just fell in love with the work. It was like it fit like a glove. I liked visiting with people. I liked seeing operations. And it wasn't hard. I thought it might be tricky, to get people to tell you what they're doing wrong and to catch people. But in reality, almost everything that you learn through interview from the operator. And very nice people, very interesting people. So that was my first year, and I think I charged $100 an inspection or something. I think I made $400. And then OCIA required that all inspectors who were going to inspect for them have to have a mandatory training. It was in Denver. Tom Harding, you may have heard of Tom Harding, was the trainer. It was 3 days long, and it was $800. And I'm like, wow, I'm not making very much money on this. I made $400, and now I'm spending $800, but I did it, and I was never sorry that I invested in that. It was different than it is now because it was 3 days and no test. And at the end, they said, pass around a piece of paper and write on what you feel you're competent to inspect. So I put down field crops, vegetables, and livestock. And the reason that I ended up suddenly traveling all over was the livestock, because only 3 of us said livestock.
Oh, wow.
And that year I ended up going all the way to Pennsylvania because there was some sheep. There were some sheep for a chapter there that I was working for in New York, and there was no inspector that would go. So from then on, I was pretty much I don't think I would ever call myself a full-time inspector. I was always a part-time inspector, but the most inspections I ever did in a year was about 120, and that's a pretty serious inspector.
Yeah.
But I usually worked out of school in the winter time and then did most of my inspections in the summer, so I was always kind of a two career person. Until 1999, when I brought the office of the International Organic Inspectors Association here to Broadus.
Now we're going to get into what the International Organic Inspectors Association does, but first, because I'm not certain everyone out there knows what an organic inspector is or what the role with the organic label is, would you mind sharing with us just a general overview of what an organic inspector does?
Sure. In some ways, I guess the most common thing that people don't understand about organic inspection is that we don't make decisions. In many inspections, the dairy inspector, the food safety inspector, there are a lot of different kinds. The building inspector, the electrical inspector can tell you to tear the wall out. An organic inspector doesn't do that. An organic inspector is assigned to visit the operation, to gather information, to make sure that this organic system plan that the operator has provided to the certification agency, make sure that it's complete and accurate, and to look for compliance to the regulation that they're inspecting to, which of course since 2002 in the U.S. has been the USDA National Organic Program regulations. And those regulations do change a little bit sometimes, especially in what materials are allowed to be used. So something can be allowed and then taken off the list. So we're looking for compliance to the regulation that we're inspecting for. We're looking at everything. We're observing, and we're interviewing the operator to gather information to determine if they're compliant. When we get done, we submit a report in some fashion to the certifier, who makes the decision on whether they are certified or continued certified or denied based on that.
And as you said, most of the information you gather, while you do get a lot from the observations, a good deal of it comes from talking with the farmer themselves.
Right.
Now, you're the executive director of the International Organic Inspectors Association. What is the organization and what does it do?
We're an educational nonprofit and a membership association of organic inspectors. When we formed in 1991, we were the Independent Organic Inspectors Association. Eventually, to better reflect what we do and what our makeup is, we changed the name, still have the same acronym, to the International Organic Inspectors Association. So for 10 years, we've had that name. A really big part of our activities is training, and we do a training almost every week somewhere in the world, either on the web or in person. So we do a lot of collaborative, co-sponsored trainings where we send people to. We have trainers we have about 20 trainers. We have trainers in Australia, Japan, Korea, Costa Rica, Canada, and the U.S. I'm sure I'm skipping somebody. And I think last year we trained in 4 languages.
Wow.
We also publish inspection manuals. So we have collaborated with the International Federation of Organic Agriculture Movements and produced an inspection manual that's basically the textbook for us. We also do, our mission is, in addition to providing quality training and addressing issues and concerns of organic inspectors, I should say we have members in about 12 countries. So we are a very international group with a heavy percentage of our members in Canada. So U.S. has the most. But one of the things that we do that's the third prong of our mission is to promote consistency and integrity in the organic certification process. So to that end, we go to the National Organic Standards Board and comment. We write letters to the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. We attend the IFOM, the International Federation of Organic Agriculture Movements. I was in Delhi last November. I was very excited to go to that meeting. Unfortunately, hit the worst smog in 17 years.
Ooh.
So it was every day like smoking 53 cigarettes.
Oh, that's awful.
So sometimes the trip of your lifetime turns out to be. I came home really, really sick. But it was a great meeting, very energizing and exciting to visit with people from all over the world who are remarkably similar in the organic community, no matter where they come from or what language they speak. It's like we all have extremely common. It is a community.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm kind of curious. It is easy for us in the U.S. to kind of forget that we're not the only ones with organic standards, but is there a lot of variation from country to country?
There is not a lot of variation. There's certainly some distinctive variation between the standards, and some are certifying things like fish, where we don't in the U.S. certify aquaculture. Some, like Japan, doesn't have a regulation to address livestock. So livestock products that are certified in the U.S. go to Japan, but they do have a regulation for crops and processing. There's not a lot of variation. Over the years, I've seen tremendous. It just gets more and more similar because there's so much working to get things so that we can import and export to each other's countries.
Mm-hmm.
I guess labeling is a big issue because labeling, of course, is so regulated by every country. But the actual organic product is pretty similar. There's a few differences, like hydroponic agriculture is being certified in the U.S., and that's generally not allowed. It's not allowed in Canada, Australia, Europe. So they kind of raise their eyebrows at that one. But mostly we're the same.
That's awesome. How did you get involved with IOIA?
Oh, I was a founding board member. Yeah, I've been involved from the beginning. And I wish I have to look this up. A group of us were at one of those mandatory certifier trainings in Slippery Rock, Pennsylvania, and I think it was 1990. If it wasn't, it was 1989. I should look it up. Anyway, there were a group of us having beer in a motel room, about 22 people talking really loud and getting very excited. And that was kind of the birthplace of in Slippery Rock, Pennsylvania, was kind of the birthplace of IOIA. But we didn't form until 1991. We had a steering committee, and I was on that steering committee. Jim Riddle of Minnesota was the chair of that committee. And we represented, I think, OCIA, ICS. Well, sorry, back then there was no ICS. It was FBO. Oregon Tilth, there were several certifiers represented in that little core group. In 1991 in Baltimore, we met, and about 20 to 30 of us, and we represented a lot of different certification agencies, and we were very enthusiastic, and we had no idea, I don't think, how much work it might end up being, but we decided that we thought we could do training better. We wanted to see organic inspection be a profession, and we wanted to work toward reciprocity because every certifier had different systems and different standards, and that seemed crazy to us. And we thought we could have an influence on inspection reporting forms and just create a voice for inspectors. So in 1991, about 30 of us plunked our money down, and we met at our first annual meeting, I guess you could call it, our organizational meeting, 1992 in Aurora, Nebraska, at a training that was Jim Riddle and I approached in Baltimore a certifier that no longer exists now, and OCIA, and we proposed that we weren't quite ready to do IOIA training at that point, but we thought we could do joint training if we could get a couple of certifiers to agree to let us do the training. And so they did. And so in 1992, Jim and I coordinated the forerunner of the first IOIA training. And in 1992 in Fayetteville, Arkansas, it was actually where ATRA is, or at that time that was the main office. And we had our first IOIA training and annual meeting. And I was secretary of the board until 1995. In 1995, I went off the board, and then I think I've missed 2 IOIA annual meetings in my lifetime.
That's impressive.
But one, maybe it's only one. I think I missed one. No, I missed 2. I missed one in Mexico, and I think I missed one in New Mexico. But in 1998, just a few years later, Jim Riddle and Joyce Ford had the office of IOIA in their home in Minnesota, and they decided they didn't want to do that anymore, so the position was advertised, and of course I was a member and doing inspections. And I thought, this is never going to come up again, and even though the timing is not perfect for me, I think I need to go for this. It was a half-time. There was no actual executive director at that point. Mm-hmm. The salary was $12,000 guaranteed, 14 hopeful. It was, a very fledgling, tiny shoestring nonprofit at that time. So I took the office from Minnesota to Montana in 1999, and in 2001, I think they changed my title to executive director. And it just turned out, I've been here almost 20 years now, and IOIA is now more than 25 years old. Sorry, that was a long answer.
No, that's really interesting because I didn't even know the full history of IOIA. And of course, we do some research, although some people listening may laugh at that. And it's just remarkable to hear that story. I'm really glad that it exists because in many ways, you guys help provide consistency to standards before there was really a USDA standard in existence.
Yeah, the one thing the one thing that happened that we're glad about is that standards got so remarkably similar. We're happy the government got involved, even though some people say that the old-timers all hated that. There is no way that we would have been able to do what we've done if government hadn't been involved and it hadn't been a regulation. But the one thing that totally surprises me, 2 things, is I thought we'd have fewer and fewer certifiers once we had a common standard. I thought there would be no, and actually what happened is we got lots more certifiers, which surprised me. The other thing that surprised me was I thought we would start getting inspection reporting forms that looked the same so that all the certifiers would maybe adopt a common form. And boy, has that not happened. But dramatically different, and you end up inspecting the same farm for, if you did it for 5 different certifiers, what you had to do to submit to the certifier is pretty dramatically different. What you actually do as an inspector is still peeking in the grain bins or looking at the receipts to see if they actually bought the fish emulsion that they said they used, or looking at the borders to see if there's any drift from the conventional neighbor next door, and all those things. You still do exactly the same thing when you do an inspection, but the reporting sure got different.
Mm-hmm. Well, Margaret, thank you so much for being on the show. I really enjoyed this conversation. Where can people go to learn more about your work at IOIA?
Our website is where most people go. We post our newsletters there. We have a good quarterly newsletter that has educational articles in it as well as news about our programs. And it's IOIA.net is our website.
And we'll link that in the show notes. Thanks again, Margaret, so much for being on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for asking me.
Big thanks to Margaret for being on the show. If you're interested to learn more about the organic inspectors and the IOIA, go to their website at ioia.net or click the link in the show notes. Thanks again for listening. If you're new to the show, please subscribe whatever podcast medium you use. And while you're there, leave a review, letting others know how great the show is. Until next time, I'm Terrence Lahue. This has been the Intellectual Agrarian Podcast, reminding you to keep farming the dream.